Hi, everyone. Welcome again to Building a Professional Brand, presented by Tom Armstrong with the Museum of Science, Boston. As a reminder, this presentation is being recorded, but we are happy to have you here today. I've got a couple of housekeeping things to cover. So for security and legal reasons, please note that participants' use of any AI tool during this event, including Read AI or Otter AI, is prohibited.
Gonna have PDF.
And I would just ask if everyone could please keep their microphones muted. We'll have time for Q&A at the beginning. I also want to note that SNHU is dedicated to inclusive meeting experiences. If you would like to enable live captions, you can select the three dots at the top of the Microsoft Teams window to expand the More menu, and then choose Language and Speech from the drop-down and click Show Live Captions. Captions will show on your screen and only your screen as we are presenting and speaking during the session. PowerPoint Live also provides additional accessibility options. These slides and the slides at the end are presented in PowerPoint Live. You can select the three dots at the bottom of the presentation slides. You'll find a magnify slide option with a minus sign to zoom out or a plus sign to zoom in, a toggle button to view the slides in high contrast, or the option to translate the slide text into a preferred language. Again, these features are only going to affect your individual experience and not the overall presentation, so please feel free to use the available accessibility options at your discretion. Individuals with accessibility needs requiring accommodations may reach out to the following resources. Online students can contact the SNHU Online Accessibility Center at oac@snhu.edu or by calling 866-305-9430. Campus students can contact the Campus Accessibility Center at cac@snhu.edu or by calling 603-644-3118. SNHU staff and faculty can request accommodations through resources in Workday or the source. Please note that requests for CART or live ASL interpreting requires at least 3 weeks of advance notice. Finally, we would love to put in a shameless plug here. So I'm going to go over some ways that you can connect with SNHU Career Resources. You can connect with a team by email or phone for resume reviews, mock interviews, job or internship search support, and more. You can also explore Career 360 for additional self-service tools. And finally, make the most of the broader SNHU network that we have, which includes Handshake, Career 360, the SNHU LinkedIn community, and of course, we have various social media channels, including YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and then CareerX channels as well. With all that being said, that is my housekeeping done. So I will go ahead, I'll stop sharing my slides, and I am so excited to invite Tom to share his presentation and to get us started. So Tom, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. Just checking in that you could hear me. See a thumbs up. Yes, great.
Yes.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Excited to be here and to talk about personal branding, building your professional identity for the job market. So about me, my name is Tom Armstrong. I use the he series pronouns, he, él. I went to Albright College in Reading, Pennsylvania, where I studied Spanish and Latin American studies, and then got my master's in educational leadership at Montclair State University in New Jersey. My professional experience, I started in higher education, working at Berklee College of Music, working in housing and residential life, and then pivoted industries into internship and volunteer programs at the Museum of Science, and was recently promoted to People Programs Manager. And just some passion areas of mine are intergenerational studies. Love talking about like Gen Z, millennials, boomers, Gen X, and like the differences in communication styles. I'm passionate about experiential learning and student development, also curating experiences. And I'm kind of here talking about this because I'm passionate about it. I think I'm really good at it. I'm confident about how I represent myself in a job search. And it also comes from my mom, who instilled in us like at a very young age about first impressions, and you never know who you're gonna meet. So about our agenda, we are gonna be talking about who am I, what do I bring, how do people experience me, and how do I intentionally shape that experience? So I was given a lot of questions prior to presenting, and I'm going to try my best to talk about them throughout the presentation. 2 questions just to kick us off. One question was, what is personal branding and how do I stand out to employers? And I would say you stand out by engaging in consistent personal branding. It's about shaping how the world sees your skills, values, and experience. The other question was, how can I build a personal brand that makes me stand out to employers and shows them the unique skills, experiences, and qualities I bring to a workplace? And I would say, hopefully, this presentation gives you some actionable steps to do so. I love to do the caveat that the job market is absolutely flooded right now. There's so many qualified people and not as many roles. And so I truly believe that networking is going to be your best friend. So we'll talk about networking a little bit, but by networking, we hope that you have a consistent image that you're putting out there to talk to these individuals that show us who you are and what you bring to the table. And just also be careful not to ask too much out of people when networking. So let's dive on in. So, who am I? Before you could build a professional brand, you need to understand the person who is beneath it, yourself. So let's talk about this identity formation. We're going to start with the concept of an identity anchor. I'm just going to read it verbatim right now. An identity anchor is something that gives you a relatively stable sense of who you are, particularly as your environment, roles, or circumstances change. These are positives and can be a negative if misused. For example, you're like, oh my God, I'm such an Aries or such an Enneagram 8. You don't want to position yourself in a category as an excuse or to make light of yourself. An example of a positive identity anchor is I view myself as a creative. I've enjoyed looking at things unconventionally or thinking about curating experiences. And this might tell people that I bring innovation and different perspectives to problems. You could also frame it as what remains true about me across different environments. This will then bring 2 different concepts. The first is a sense of self. How do I see myself? What do I value? What motivates me? What roles do I identify with? And what experiences have shaped me? And then a sense of place. Where do I fit? What communities do I belong to? Who are my people? What environments bring out my best? And what role do I naturally play within a group? These are just really great reflective prompts. Whether it's a sense of self and the internal understanding of who you are, or a sense of place about your relationship with communities and systems about you. You might want to leave thinking, what are 3 communities I belong to? What are 3 values that guide me? What are 3 experiences that have shaped me? 3 words I might use to describe myself, just as a tool to kind of start figuring out like the who am I? Because as we move forward, we're gonna have to think about our bioecological considerations. This is my like student development nerd coming out. This is the next step. You're developing this idea of who you are, and now it's time to think about how does the world experience you, and how are you experiencing the world? So there's no answers here. This is all just self-reflection. But again, like how does the world engage with me? What are expectations placed on me? What are some opportunities I've been given? Or how do I engage the world? What communities do I participate in? How do I contribute? Your key takeaway here is that your identity doesn't exist in a vacuum. Your personal brand is partly about understanding the intersection between who I am, where am I, and how do I interact with that world? So as we've developed this who am I concept, we now want to talk about what do I bring? This is your value. This section is going to be broken up into attributes and strengths. The core of this information is that this is what you are selling. This is what you bring to the table in a resume, in an interview, on LinkedIn. So let's dive into what these are. So attributes, your personal value. Attributes are experiences, perspectives, interests, and characteristics that show up that shape how you show up. They answer, what do I uniquely bring because of who I am and what I've experienced? Your attributes aren't valuable just because you're interesting. They're valuable because they influence how you think and how you work. So they start by your story. What has shaped me? Your interests. What am I curious about? Your perspective. How do I see the world differently? And personal wins. What have I demonstrated about myself? And I kind of showed you a little bit of this when I introduced myself. I talked about who I was, where I came from, my interests, and shared that, I'm passionate about this and my mom taught me about it. So we're gonna move forward. I want to give three brief examples of, how you might sell some of these attributes in three different lens of maybe three different college students. For example, one might love theater. This tells us that you understand storytelling and audience engagement, or you bring a creative lens to communicating ideas. Or if this student is bilingual, you understand navigating between cultures and languages, and you bring adaptability, cross-cultural communication. And the last student might be a competitive athlete. You understand discipline, feedback, teamwork. You bring persistence and accountability. So as you start to develop that concept of like, what are your attributes, you also want to think about what are your strengths. Your strengths, they're your professional and technical value. Strengths are the capabilities, competencies, and patterns that create professional value. So this might be your technical skills, like software you use, or writing skills, or financial skills, or transferable skills like leadership, problem solving, organization. And then your demonstrative strengths, so projects you've successfully completed, positive feedback you've received. Now, I got two questions. How can students with little work experience create a strong professional brand? It's not about the quantity of work, it's about the quality. How are you talking about what you've done, as well as that typical networking? But it's not about, a person who's had a million jobs, but maybe, I've had 10 jobs in 10 years. That's telling me as a recruiter that you've had one job a year and you're not established, you're bouncing around a lot, while one person who's only had one job was there for a long time. They're more committed to the mission. And then how can I better sell my accomplishments while not sounding arrogant was another question we got. And I would say this probably comes down to your tone. I firmly believe this is the time to kind of be bragging about yourself and talking about your strengths and really selling yourself. So I would just be mindful of like, how are you presenting it to others? Now you might get stuck and you might be thinking like, okay, how do I discover what my strengths are? This is how I've done it. I've started with self-assessments. So I might look up the Myers-Briggs or the Gallup Strengths Quest or even Enneagram. These personality assessments or intakes, what they've done for me is they've just given me the language to articulate things that I've already like thought or felt or done. They've given me the vocabulary to be able to talk about it. I've asked my network, I've asked my colleagues, what do you think I'm particularly good at? Or what do you come to me for? These start to help me define, like, okay, this is what I've done better. This is what I could be selling to an employer. And lastly, you might want to benchmark. Look up people in the roles that you desire. What do they have in common? Where am I competitive compared to them? And where do I have a gap in my strengths? Another question I got was, how do you ignore imposter syndrome? I would first say start by not ignoring it. You want to acknowledge that you're experiencing these feelings of not feeling adequate enough. Understand, what is at the root of that. Do you not think that your experiences are valuable? And how do you break down those constructs? Use your friends and your network to hype you up. There's only one of you in the world, and that is authentic and that is exciting and unique. And so these are normal feelings we have all felt before. And it's just about how we, take a step back from that imposter syndrome to understand that you are valuable. The next part is how will people engage with your brand? So, your brand is your first impression, whether that's a resume, a LinkedIn, or digital presence, and your cover letter. Then the initial interaction of email, phone screen, voicemail, interview, and then ongoing communication, whether it's your communication style, follow through, collaboration, professional relationships. Um, you want to, as you're designing these things, thinking, are these touch points telling the same story? If someone's LinkedIn says they're creative, collaborative, and detail oriented, but they send an email with, no subject line, or they've sent in their application in all lowercase, that's telling me that there's a disconnect here. Maybe they're not as detail oriented as they thought. So we're going to go into some touch point tips and tricks. Another question we got before I dive in was, how can someone build this authentic professional brand that feels genuine without coming across as overly curated or inauthentic? And there's no specific answer to this. I would just be showing my friends, families, bosses, colleagues, and resources at SNHU for their opinion. How does this come across? So let's look at a resume. I would first say find your formatting. SNHU offers free resume assistance, and I would absolutely take them up on it. You don't want your resume to be hard to read. I threw an example of what mine looked like on here because this is my preferred style. I think this is easy to read, but you want to tailor your resume to the role. I typically recommend everyone to just make a really long document. It could be multi-page about all your experiences. That way, for each role, you can copy and paste what is specific to the role. And again, you want to keep that resume one page. You want to make your strongest experiences easy to find, quantify the results when possible. So if you have statistical evidence, you want to use language from the industry and job description. And again, keep the formatting consistent to the industry. I typically say for resumes I review at the museum, I don't want to be seeing like headshots and a lot of color because that's not a standard for our industry. While if you're going into a more creative industry, that might be the standard. And again, your cover letter should answer why you, why this organization, and why this opportunity. And then I want to show two examples of resumes that I have not necessarily enjoyed. So the first one is kind of similar to the second one in starting with the formatting. Um, I have to jump around and look at these documents to try to find my answers. Where did they go to school? What are their skills? There's too many columns and ways for me to jump around. If I have 700 resumes to review for my internship program, I have to be able to find your information quickly. And the second is also just, the one on the right just has 2 pages to it. That's too long, especially, for an internship. I don't know why a student would have 2 pages worth of experience, but that's just like an interesting thought. And I would just be also mindful of the information you share on here. I did once get a resume that in their objective or the about me section of their resume, they said that they wanted to make their mom proud. And like, I get it. I also want to make my mom proud, but is that like not necessarily something you want to share like in a resume? Then we want to talk about some digital platforms. If someone Googled you before an interview, what would they find? And so, where can people find you? LinkedIn, a portfolio, personal website, social media, published work, professional organizations. I just shared a picture of what my LinkedIn looks like. Feel free to follow me on there. I want to be mindful that LinkedIn is not Instagram. Right now, as employers and people in talent acquisition, we are definitely seeing individuals starting to treat LinkedIn a little less professionally and sharing like just kind of random things or some interesting takes. You want to be mindful of like the influencer mindset and be careful and mindful of like what you're sharing on these platforms. I would also say not everyone needs a personal website. It's so important for you to know what your industry is asking for. So again, you have such a successful and intelligent careers team at SNHU. This is me as an employer putting some validity to it. So ask them, meet with them. And at the very least, definitely get a LinkedIn. And then these are some very like high level, quick tips and tricks, but phone screens and voicemails. You want to answer professionally, have a clear voicemail greeting and an appropriate one. It surprises me that to this day, there's still some people treating their voicemail like how we used to in the early thousands, where it's like a silly joke or like a song playing. And it's like, just kidding, this is Tom. And maybe not the best voicemail to have as you're applying for roles. You want to be mindful of your call filtering and do not disturb. If we set up a time for me to call you for a phone screen, I don't want to be declined. I've got a lot of work to do. I don't want to have to keep following up with you to try to get you to answer my phone call. You want to be aware of your background noise. And also, you don't want to sound like inconvenienced when talking to a recruiter. You want to have a little bit more excitement to it, even though it's just a phone screen. Interviews. So this is where that brand comes three-dimensional. You're no longer just presenting information, you're demonstrating it. So, I listed some things you're demonstrating, but I want to be mindful of in an interview, how do you act? When you're sitting at a table, it's okay to have notes in front of you to refer to. It's okay to write notes. If someone asks a question that you didn't know how to answer, you can take a moment and like sit in silence. And that silence might be uncomfortable or awkward, and that is okay. Take a moment, take a breath, and think about what they're asking. You might ask them to ask it a different way or confirm, from what I'm understanding you're saying, you're, trying to learn more about my time management skills. Is that correct? And then answer their question. Um, be mindful of who you're interacting with. If you go on site for an interview, you want to acknowledge everyone you pass and meet, and just demonstrate like a little more of a friendly demeanor. And then overall communications. So every interaction is a brand touch point. That includes emails, Slack and Teams messages, thank you notes, meeting behavior. I just want to tell one quick story about kind of thank you notes. And it's about my role here at the Museum of Science. It was a hard search. It was 90 applications for me trying to get a job. And I was really excited about the Museum of Science in Boston. And so I was making sure all my materials were, consistent formatting and resume and cover letter. My LinkedIn, was branded, had a nice picture of me, was like, it had some excitement to it. When I came on site, I had printed out portfolios I designed. And, it's taking this extra initiative that you might not want to do with every role, but do it for the roles that like the top role that your dream job. So I spent hours designing a portfolio for them that I printed out. And then after my on-site interview with I met with 5 folks. I was here for a few hours. I took notes during interviews so that at the end of the day, I went down to the lobby. I looked back at my notes and I wrote individualized thank you notes. And again, this is time consuming. This was a lot of work. So you don't want to burn yourself out by doing this, but it is like such a cherry on top when you're able to cite back something someone specifically said and write them a thank you note. And I was like a little extra about it and noticed that like my thank you cards were biodegradable and they had seeds that were native to Massachusetts in them. And it's like, oh, very STEM of me. But it was so exciting. Like I thought it was so cheesy, but it was exciting. That was like kind of like the energy I wanted to bring. And it went over so well. At the end of the day, what do you take away from this? And again, I blasted through this information because I'm not going to sit here and build your brand for you. Your brand is you. You need to know yourself. Who am I? Then where do I fit in? What is that context? What do I bring by identifying your value? And then how do I tell my story with communicating your value? Lastly, you want to just deliver that experience. This whole presentation is really just my opinion, my philosophy. These were informed by my life and professional experiences. Um, and it's just a nugget. I wasn't going to promise you were going to leaving here today and like you were going to have it and solve it and be, top candidate everywhere. You need to put in the work. It's a lot of self-reflection. And, when you get these slides later, I hope you go through them again and you start taking these prompts and journaling or going for a walk and writing them down to make yourself successful. And so again, I know we ran through that. I want to say thank you and then allow time for like some questions, comments, thoughts, and feelings. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.